John had lived his whole life on this land. The river was his alarm clock, the rustling trees his companions, and the dam his legacy. Every morning before the sun peeked over the horizon, John would lace his boots and walk the length of the dam. Its massive stone walls, though weathered by decades of storms, stood strong, just as his father once told him, "Son, this dam is more than stone and steel. It's our lifeline, our protection." He would pause at the wheel that controlled the floodgates, resting his hand on the cold metal, almost as if greeting an old friend. For John, this land wasn't just property. It was his father's memory, his grandfather's sweat, and his own heartbeat. But while the land gave him peace deep inside, John feared something. He knew people no longer respected land or tradition. To them, it was just real estate waiting to be exploited. That morning, he didn't know how right he was. The first sign came not as a warning, but as a violent shock. Instead of birdsong, the dawn was shattered by the grinding roar of heavy machinery. John rushed outside and his heart sank. Bulldozers were tearing down trees on the far side of his field. Trucks lined the dirt road, engines growling. Surveyors in neon vests hammered stakes into the soil. A massive banner flapped in the wind. Future HOA development. Riverfront villas. Luxury living by the water. John felt his blood run cold. His riverfront? His land? He clutched the deed papers that hung framed inside his cabin. He owned every inch, inherited legally from his father. Yet, here they were, acting like kings dividing spoils. John marched down the muddy track, boots sinking in wet soil until he stood before the commotion. Out of the chaos strode a woman in heels. Clipboard under her arm, sunglasses glinting. Her posture screamed authority she didn't truly have. "Good morning," she said with a tight smile. "I'm Karen, president of the Riverfront HOA. You must be the caretaker?" "I'm the owner," John replied flatly. Karen smirked, tapping her clipboard. "Not anymore. The community voted for expansion. This land is perfect for development. We're bringing progress. You should be grateful." John's voice turned cold. "This land is mine." "You've built on the wrong ground." Karen waved him off. "Oh, don't be dramatic. Progress can't be stopped." She turned her back before he could respond, barking orders to workers. "Pour the foundation over there." For the first time, John felt the sting of helplessness. Within days, the invasion deepened. Trees that once shaded his walks were ripped from the earth, their roots exposed like broken bones. Concrete mixers rumbled day and night, spitting gray rivers into wooden molds. Wooden skeletons of houses began rising where deer once grazed. John watched, powerless as flocks of birds flew away, never to return. His soil, once fertile and green, was now scarred with tire marks and cement dust. At night, instead of the lullaby of crickets, he heard drilling, hammers, and laughter from workers who didn't know or didn't care that they were trespassing. John's anger grew, but he bottled it up. For now, John fought back the only way he knew, legally. He walked into lawyer offices with thick folders of deeds, tax records, and land surveys, proof that the dam, the fields, and the riverbank belonged to him. But each time, the answer was the same. "Mr. John, I'm afraid the county records show recent adjustments. The HOA has powerful backing. We can't win this." Judges avoided his eyes. County clerks shrugged as if their hands were tied. Rumors spread of bribes and favors exchanged behind closed doors. One lawyer finally told him, "You're not fighting for land, John. You're fighting against money. And money always wins." John left the courthouse with papers still in his hand, but hope slipping from his heart. Weeks later, John attended a town hall meeting clutching his deed. The hall was packed with homeowners eager to praise the HOA. Karen stood on stage, spotlight shining on her like a queen. When John raised his concerns, Karen smirked. "Oh, here comes the angry land hermit again," she said into the microphone. The crowd laughed. John held up the deed. "This is my land." "You've stolen it." Karen leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen, progress doesn't stop because one man waves an old piece of paper. We've already built 20 homes. Soon there will be 55, and what will he do? Stand by and sulk? The crowd roared with laughter. Cameras captured every moment. John's hands shook, not with shame, but with rage. He turned and walked out, his shadow long under the fluorescent lights. That night, John walked the dam. The moonlight spilled silver over the rushing waters below. He stopped at the giant steel wheel, cold and rusted but strong as ever. He placed his palm on it, feeling the vibration of the river straining against the gates. His father's words echoed, "This dam doesn't just feed the land, son. It controls it. Never forget the river obeys us, but it can also punish." John closed his eyes, listening to the roar of the water. For the first time, he imagined what would happen if he let it loose. If the gates opened. If the river reclaimed what was stolen. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the sky itself was answering him. And in that moment, John realized the HOA had built their paradise on borrowed time. By midsummer, the land John once called home had been disfigured beyond recognition. 55 homes now lined the riverfront, each one bigger and flashier than the last. Neon-lit driveways, manicured lawns, and sparkling swimming pools turned the countryside into a suburban showroom. Families moved in with wide smiles, praising Karen's vision. To them, she was a hero who had created paradise. John, however, was now a ghost in his own land. When residents jogged past him on the dirt road, they whispered behind his back, "That's the angry man who lost his land." At night, John stood at his cabin window, looking at the glowing rows of villas. He clenched his fists. Those lights were like scars burning into the soil. His soil. The HOA's greed didn't stop at the villas. One morning, John walked out to find that workers had begun fencing off his barn and orchard, the last untouched part of his property. He shouted, "This is still mine!" The guards posted by the HOA shoved him back roughly. Karen arrived in her luxury car, stepping out with a smug smile. "Oh, John, don't be so possessive. You should be grateful we're raising property values. Your shack will be worth more now." John's voice cracked with fury. "You're not raising value. You're destroying history. You're killing the land." Karen leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "History doesn't pay bills. Progress does." Then she turned her back and walked away. That was the moment John felt something in him snap. John's reputation in town crumbled. At the diner, whispers followed him. Parents pulled their children away when he entered. A teenager muttered under his breath, "That's the river hermit, crazy old man." He sat alone at the counter, coffee growing cold, as the world around him celebrated Karen's success. The newspaper headlines mocked him indirectly. Riverfront villas, progress over old traditions. Even his friends avoided him. Nobody wanted to fight against the HOA's influence. John's once proud presence now carried the weight of humiliation. Yet deep inside, his resolve only hardened. The final insult came when Karen unveiled her grandest plan yet, a luxury marina cutting directly into the riverbank. At the press conference, she stood on stage with a dazzling smile, pointing at a map. "Picture it," she declared. "Private docks, luxury yachts, a riverside promenade. This community will be unmatched in the county." The crowd erupted in applause. But John saw the truth. Cutting into the riverbank would destabilize the dam. "You're playing with forces you don't understand," he warned. Karen laughed in his face. "Oh, John, the only force I see is progress. Maybe one day you'll thank me." The cameras caught her laughter. But no one captured John's expression, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Determined not to give up, John went back to his cabin and opened an old chest. Inside were the original papers, yellowed, fragile, but undeniable proof. The dam, the riverbank, the farmland. It was all his, signed and sealed by the county decades ago. He marched into another HOA meeting, papers in hand. "These prove it. You're all trespassing." Karen snatched the documents, skimmed them, then smirked for the cameras. "Old paper? Outdated records? You think this means anything now?" She tossed them back into his chest. "This community is bigger than one man's dusty inheritance," she announced. "And no court will touch this. Not when progress is at stake." The audience applauded her arrogance. John stood frozen, his fists trembling. That was the night his faith in the system died. Storms brewed both in the skies and in John's heart. He roamed the dam at midnight, lightning cracking overhead, rain pounding his shoulders. The river below was wild, restless, as if it felt his anger. John gripped the steel railings so hard his knuckles turned white. Memories of his father teaching him about the dam flashed before his eyes, how the gates could control life and death. He whispered into the storm, "They think I'm powerless. They think money is stronger than land. But the river listens. The river remembers." For the first time, the thought wasn't fleeting. For the first time, he meant it. Back in his cabin, John placed the dam keys on the wooden table. He sat in silence, staring at them for hours as the storm raged outside. He remembered Karen's mocking laughter, the crowd's jeers, the loss of his barn, his orchard, his soil. One by one, every insult replayed in his mind, fueling the fire inside him. Finally, his hand reached forward, resting on the keys. His voice was low, steady, and cold. "Tomorrow, the river speaks." The storm outside thundered in agreement, as though nature itself had chosen sides. The morning after John made his decision, the town woke up to sunshine. Birds chirped, children rode bicycles through the new community, and neighbors watered lawns as if nothing could touch their world. But John wasn't smiling. He sat on the dam wall staring at the river below. The water was calm, deceptively calm, its surface reflecting the blue sky. Yet beneath it, power churned, power only he controlled. He watched as construction crews worked on Karen's marina. Bulldozers dug into the fragile riverbank, piling rocks, hammering steel beams. Each strike echoed through his skull like a drumbeat of arrogance. To the community, it was progress. To John, it was a countdown. That weekend, Karen hosted a massive celebration of progress. White tents lined the new streets, music blared, and champagne flowed. She gave a triumphant speech in front of cheering homeowners. "Look around," she shouted, raising her glass. "From farmland to fortune, from wilderness to wealth, this is the future." The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name. John stood at the edge of the gathering, watching silently. He noticed the smug look on Karen's face as she gestured toward the dam in the distance. "And soon we'll build more, bigger, better, stronger. Nothing can stop us now." Her words echoed in John's ears like a challenge. He turned away, muttering, "We'll see." That night, John opened one of the dam's smaller gates, just enough to release a surge of water. The sudden torrent rushed downstream, ripping through the half-finished marina, tearing equipment from the banks. When the workers arrived the next morning, chaos greeted them. Scaffolding twisted, cranes toppled, supplies swept away. Karen stormed onto the site, screaming, "Who did this?" But John watched from a distance, face unreadable. It wasn't the full force, not yet. It was only a whisper of what the river could do, a warning that nature wasn't to be toyed with. Karen didn't understand. She laughed bitterly, brushing mud from her designer shoes. "Fix it all. Double the workforce. We don't stop for setbacks." The crowd cheered again. John's jaw tightened. If they couldn't hear the whisper, they would soon hear the roar. Lightning split the night sky. Rain poured down in sheets, hammering rooftops and filling gutters to the brim. The river swelled, growling under the weight of the storm. John stood alone inside the dam control room, soaked to the bone. The steel levers gleamed under the flicker of lightning, waiting for his command. He placed his hand on the master lever, trembling not from fear but from rage and anticipation. He remembered his father's words. "The river is life, but if you betray it, it becomes death," and the HOA had betrayed it. They had betrayed him. Thunder roared as if the heavens themselves were giving him permission. John whispered, "Tonight, they listen." With a grunt, John yanked the lever down. The dam groaned like a beast awakening after decades of slumber. Gates creaked open, and the river burst forth in a wall of fury. The unleashed torrent roared into the valley, swallowing the marina, smashing fences, uprooting lawns. Families screamed as water surged into the pristine streets, sweeping away cars and tearing porches apart. The once shiny villas cracked under nature's rage, foundations shattering like glass. Karen, standing on her villa's balcony, froze in disbelief as the flood rose around her mansion. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tiles. This can't be happening! But it was, and John was watching. By dawn, the storm had passed, and silence blanketed the land. Where once stood 55 proud homes, only ruins remained, shattered wood, broken concrete, mud covering everything. The so-called paradise was gone, erased in a single night. John stood on the dam wall, the sun rising behind him. His face was neither joyful nor regretful. It was carved with the weight of inevitability. The river flowed calmly once more, as if it had merely reclaimed what was always its own. Karen was gone. The HOA was no more. The land lay broken but free. John whispered into the morning air. "You built on my land without respect. Now the land has spoken." And with that he turned, walking back toward his cabin, alone but victorious. The sun rose, but peace never came. The entire HOA community was in shambles. Families wandered the muddy streets in shock, carrying what little they had salvaged. Cars were half submerged, walls broken, trees uprooted. Helicopters buzzed above, capturing live footage. News anchors' voices trembled as they reported, "Overnight, a catastrophic flood has destroyed the luxury homes of the newly built HOA community." Karen stood in the ruins of her once grand villa, hair tangled, makeup smeared. She clenched her fists as she screamed, "Where is he? Where is John?" But John wasn't hiding. He stood tall on the dam, watching everything like a judge overlooking his court. His silence was louder than her screams. Desperation twisted into rage. Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting. What was left of it? Only a handful of board members came, soaked and broken. But Karen, still in her ruined pink suit, slammed her fists on the table. "This is not the end. We rebuild. Stronger, bigger, higher walls this time. The insurance will pay, and he will not win." Her voice cracked, but she forced a smile for the cameras that still followed her. This was just an act of God, but deep down she knew. It wasn't God, it was John. That evening, Karen stormed up to the dam with 2 police officers. The flood had washed away her arrogance, but not her pride. She pointed at John, standing on the high wall, raincoat billowing in the wind. "Arrest him!" she screamed. The officers hesitated. They looked around at the devastation, at the families shivering in the mud. One of them muttered, "Ma'am, I think he just saved the land from you." Karen's face went pale. "What did you say?" But the officers didn't move. They weren't about to arrest the man whose land had been stolen, whose patience had been tested beyond reason. That night, John sat alone in his cabin, lantern flickering. His hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of water. He replayed. Everything in his mind, the bulldozers, the laughter, the taunts, the betrayal. Had he done the right thing? The flood had destroyed homes, yes, but it had also destroyed dreams. Families who blindly trusted Karen were now homeless. John closed his eyes. He could almost hear his father's voice again. "The river doesn't choose sides. It simply gives back what's taken from it." Tears welled up in his eyes. He wasn't a villain, but he wasn't a hero either. He was something in between, a man forced to awaken nature's wrath. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. Cameras caught. Her stumbling through the wreckage, shouting at reporters, blaming everyone but herself. "It was sabotage! He's a terrorist! He destroyed everything!" she screamed. But when journalists asked for proof, she faltered. Her empire was crumbling not just in bricks and stone, but in reputation. Insurance companies pulled back, lawsuits piled up, and the county officials she had bribed suddenly vanished into silence. At night, she sat alone in the ruins of her villa, sobbing, surrounded by broken glass and mud. For the first time, she wasn't the queen of anything. She was just a woman with nothing left. A week later, the community gathered at the town hall. Families demanded answers. Reporters filled the room. Karen stood at the podium, voice hoarse. This was not my fault. It was John's fault. His dam, his storm, his vendetta. But then, slowly, the crowd turned their gaze toward the back of the hall, where John stood. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. One by one, people began to realize the truth. Karen hadn't built a community. She had built a castle of lies on stolen land, and nature itself had passed judgment. The hall fell silent. Karen's words died in her throat. She looked around, desperate, but no one stood by her anymore. The verdict was unspoken but clear. Karen had lost. Despite the devastation, Karen refused to accept defeat. A week later, she organized a HOA rebirth festival to show strength. Broken homes were decorated with cheap banners, tents lined the mud, and she stood in a new dress, forcing a smile. "See?" she shouted into the microphone, voice trembling. "We're stronger than nature itself. We rebuild. We rise again." But as she spoke, dark clouds gathered once more. Thunder rolled across the valley. The river swelled with the season's heaviest rain, its surface boiling with restrained fury. And up on the dam, John stood silently, watching. His face unreadable, his hands resting on the cold steel levers. The crowd laughed and cheered for Karen. They didn't see the storm coming, but John did. By nightfall, the festival had turned into chaos. Rain lashed against the tents, wind ripped banners away, and water crept dangerously close to the edges of the ruined streets. Families panicked, rushing to higher ground. Karen screamed into her microphone, "Stay calm! Stay in your homes! The dam will hold!" But her voice was drowned out by thunder and the rising river. She looked up at the dam, where a lone figure was silhouetted against lightning, John. Her face went pale. For the first time, she realized what was about to happen. "No, he wouldn't," she whispered, trembling, but deep down she knew. He would, midnight. The storm was at its peak. The control room shook with the roar of water pressing against the gates. John gripped the master lever, his knuckles white. He closed his eyes, whispering to his father's memory. "You told me the river gives life, but when they steal, it takes it back." With a heavy pull, he unlocked the dam. The gates thundered open. A wall of water exploded forth, 10 stories high, ripping through the valley like a monster finally unleashed. Trees snapped like twigs, cars spun like toys, and the ground shook as homes were torn from their foundations. Karen's villa, the pride of her empire, was the first to fall. Water smashed through its walls, chandeliers crashing, marble floors collapsing. Karen stood frozen on the balcony, screaming as her kingdom dissolved in seconds. Families scrambled to safety, but the HOA's false paradise was gone. Every lie, every brick, every dollar, all swept away in one unstoppable surge. By dawn, the storm had passed. The valley lay drowned in silence. Where once stood 55 proud homes, only wreckage remained, splintered wood, broken glass, and endless mud. Karen was gone, her empire erased. Her name, once chanted in pride, was now whispered in anger and pity. John stood atop the dam, soaked, exhausted, yet steady. Below him, the river flowed calmly, its rage spent. Reporters arrived, helicopters circling. Cameras zoomed in on John, but he didn't give a speech. He didn't gloat. He simply turned and walked back toward his cabin, his silhouette fading into the morning mist. The land was his again, not by law, not by papers, by nature itself. And as the sun rose, the world finally understood. The river had spoken, and its judgment was final. The valley was still drowning in silence when Karen stumbled back into view. Her once polished appearance was gone, dress torn, hair tangled, makeup streaked with mud. Yet her eyes still burned with defiance. She climbed the broken steps of the ruined community center where survivors had gathered. Families shivered under blankets. Children cried softly. Reporters whispered among themselves, and then Karen's voice sliced through the air. This was his doing. she screamed, pointing toward the dam. "John destroyed everything." "Arrest him!" All eyes turned toward the dam wall, where John stood, framed by the morning light. He didn't flinch. He just stared back, calm as stone. The crowd murmured. For the first time, doubt spread, not toward John, but toward Karen. Karen marched up the muddy path toward the dam, shoes sinking with every step. Reporters followed, cameras rolling, capturing every second. When she reached the top, she was out of breath, but still spitting venom. "You ruined me, John," she shouted, rain dripping from her trembling hands. "You think you're some kind of hero? You destroyed families, dreams, lives. For what?" John's eyes narrowed. His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "For respect, Karen. For the land. For everything you laughed at when you built your empire on what wasn't yours." Karen's voice cracked. "I built a community." "No," John interrupted, stepping closer, his gaze sharp. "You built a lie. And lies never last. The cameras caught every word. The world was watching her unravel." Karen broke down, her knees buckling as she sobbed in the mud. Reporters zoomed in, recording the fall of a woman once feared and admired. She looked up at John, voice shaking, desperate. Please tell them I wasn't wrong. Tell them it wasn't all my fault." John's face remained stone cold. He turned his back to her, staring out over the calm river that had just unleashed its fury. Then, with his voice steady and final, he said, "This land always belonged to me. You just never listened." He walked away, leaving Karen crumpled on the ground as the cameras flashed. The verdict was sealed, not by courts, not by papers, but by truth and nature itself. The confrontation was over. Within days, the valley turned into a spectacle. News vans lined the muddy roads, helicopters circled overhead, and headlines screamed across every channel, "HOA empire drowned by its own greed." "Local man's dam washes away illegal 55-millimeter development." Investigations revealed everything. Karen's bribes to county officials, forged permits, environmental violations. The officials who once backed her vanished into hiding, some even arrested. The homeowners, though devastated, began to realize the truth. They weren't victims of John. They were victims of Karen's ambition. Some even approached John at the dam, apologizing with lowered eyes. John didn't celebrate. He didn't speak to cameras. He simply stood by the dam each evening, staring at the water, knowing the land had been restored to silence. Karen, meanwhile, was finished. Lawsuits rained down on her. Her name became a curse in town, her empire reduced to rubble and debt. She disappeared from public view, a ghost of arrogance. Months later, spring arrived. The valley, once scarred with concrete and broken homes, began to heal. Wild grass pushed through the mud. Birds returned. The river sparkled under the sun, calm and steady, as though it had never unleashed its fury. John walked along the dam at dawn, his boots crunching on the gravel. He carried no bitterness, no pride, only a quiet sense of balance. He paused at the edge, looking down at the water. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a smile. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "The river is patient, son. But it never forgets." John whispered into the wind, "Neither do I." As the sun rose over his land, the camera pulled back, showing the vast valley, the flowing river, and the man who had reclaimed it all. The story ended not with a shout, but with silence, the silence of justice delivered.